I'm Eric Chemi, and this is Politely Pushy. Jered, thanks for joining me today. You don't hear a lot about PR tech, a lot of AI in PR tech, so it's really cool to have you on because you're doing a lot, all this digital marketing. Before we got together for this, I'd never heard of OnePitch, so I wish I had heard about it before. I wish I had seen this tool in the past because it would have made my life a lot better as a journalist. So I'm glad that it exists. I'm glad that you're working on it. I want to hear all about it. Thanks for joining me on the show today.
Yeah, absolutely, Eric. Very excited to share more about OnePitch, and very much glad and appreciate you having me on the show today.
So just tell me, what exactly is it? How do you define it? Because I know on the website it says connecting journalists and PR pros and trying to make it simpler, and there's AI and you don't have to manually make media lists. So what's really going on here?
Yeah, I like to explain OnePitch in very simple terms. It's pretty much a matching tool. And I like to kind of use the comparison. It's not a Tinder or something where you're swiping and that sort of thing. It's more like a match.com, where folks like PR professionals, marketers, communicators can come in. They create a very simple profile, tell us a little bit about themselves, the type of company that they work for, and then they can start submitting pitches through the platform. And I say submitting pitches because what we do and what the technology does is it looks over pitches, it looks over even press releases, analyzes the text from those, extracts very specific data points like subject matter, any of the people, the companies, the products that are being discussed, and then compares those to our database of articles that are written by journalists. And we look at the same things that journalists write about, and that's how we correlate matches between the two sides. And like you mentioned, the end product or the end result would be you submit that pitch and we generate a very customized media list based on the types of journalists that write about the similar or the same types of subject matter that are being pitched.
Because I would get pitched all the time. When I was at Bloomberg and CNBC, I get pitched all kinds of nonsense that had nothing to do with anything that I had written. And it was clear to me I'm just on some generic spam list. And I think PR professionals, I don't know if they realize that when one person does that, it makes the whole industry look bad. When there are so many good people that are trying to target to the right people, they're trying to read the right articles, reach out to the right people. But from my point of view as a journalist, a lot of times it's just like, all this PR stuff is just a spam in my inbox. I can see you're trying to make that a little bit better.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think a lot of the PR professionals are familiar with the hashtag PR fail. And so we see this time and time again on Twitter where journalists are getting pitched, irrelevant things. Maybe they're related slightly to their beat, or maybe, they're completely unrelated. But that's, again, where our service is really designed to inform those PR and marketing professionals about what journalists write about. You mentioned articles as an example, and that's something that we, again, have leveraged very heavily through our service with trying to drive relevancy. So much so as well that when we display that media list, we give these users specific data points, one of them being the articles that are deemed most relevant. And it's very easy for them, obviously, to read over the article as well as incorporate some of that information within the pitch to really drive not only that, the likeness between what they're pitching and what's being written about, but obviously to kind of go above and beyond and to personalize those emails a bit more, since we know at the end of the day, personalization is key when it comes to pitches. It's not, what they used to call spray and pray is not an effective method anymore. It's really that one-on-one approach, really driving in and honing in on how that pitch resonates closely with what the journalist covers, as well as what their audience is most interested in reading about.
Is part of the trick to still, in a way, spray and pray a little bit with what's happening behind the scenes, but as far as the journalist is concerned, it looks like they're the only person getting that email? Is that part of the trick with the technology?
I would say yes and no. In a way, yes, because we are giving these individuals a list of 10 journalists. So there is a couple of extra matches in there, I guess you could say, above and beyond what maybe more of a targeted list, right? But at the end of the day, we know from industry best practices, what's called the 80-20 rule. This is something that Michael Smart, who is a pitching resource veteran, if you want to call him as such, has mentioned. And basically it says focus 80% of the time, or 80% of your time, on the top 20% of your list. So we're really trying to hone in on the list size, reduce the amount of targeted contacts that you would want to get in touch with, and really, again, drive data to make those decisions possible in terms of who you reach out to, why you reach out to them, and then all of the information that you would incorporate into that.
So it's almost like you're a Google, because you have to keep track of all these articles, all these reports. You need to have a constant crawler that's looking at everything that's being published. Are you dealing with a lot of that type of technology on the back end in order to make this work?
Yeah. I'm part of the team who not only manages, but also has helped to build a lot of that back end functionality. And I can tell you right now, we have a little bit shy of about 3,000 journalists in our actual database. We're continuing to scale that each day and each week. But in total articles, we have over 200,000. And we are analyzing articles on a daily basis for all of those journalists in the database. So that, it can range from somebody writing one article a day to one article a week, all the way to 3 or 4 per day. So we are, keeping track of all of those. We're looking at what the headlines are, the dates that they were published, the dates that they were updated. So there's very much a lot of technology that goes on behind the scenes, and we try to make it as simple as possible for everybody on the front end to be able to understand what it all means.
So what is your background to do this? Because you could say, all right, this is a perfect job for a technologist, a perfect job for a digital marketer, perfect job for a PR person, but not everyone can be all three. But you got to come from somewhere to do this. So what is your background? Why did you decide this is a problem that I need to fix and I'm the one qualified to do it?
Yeah, I've been very fortunate. My co-founder, Beck Bamberger, she has owned her own PR agency for over the last 10 years. So she has really been not only a mentor to me, but also really helped us to design something that has taken the traditional PR tool approach and made it that much better. My background has been primarily in marketing and communications. So I've kind of helped to bridge, all of those different industries or different departments together and create something that is easily interpretable, whether somebody is a PR professional and knows all there is to know about media relations, or somebody who's brand new and just getting into it, but understands the value that it brings. So I can't say that I am necessarily the genius behind it all. But I've certainly been able to, to help bring the service to what it is today, and been very fortunate enough. All the folks that we've worked with for the past few years have also been a part of that building process and helping us to refine things and make it, much more simple to use and much clearer for the folks who are and are not professionals in the space.
It feels to me right now that comms tech, PR tech, whatever you want to call it, not as advanced as maybe some other industries are. It feels like a lot of agencies, they're running things off of email lists, Word docs, Google Sheets. It's real manual. It's a lot of hand-to-hand combat. So when you're trying to sell technology, do you find that because there's not a lot of technology around, you have an easier sell because it's a rare opportunity for someone to buy you as a vendor? Or is it a harder sell because they're not really used to buying a lot of technology? They don't have a big tech stack.
Yeah, what we have found is that there are other services out there that people are very familiar with. So I think there's always this idea that they're augmenting, other services, like you said, maybe Excel or some other various tools to kind of complement the services that they use. For us, we've found that our service is not really a full end-to-end service. We really focus, and our bread and butter is really on pitching and media relations. So we complement anybody who is really focusing on that space to begin with.
Right.
But in terms
it's like
of
that targeted, that media relations, you got to get these reporters, that part of the game, which we know there's a much bigger game, but you're just trying to get that piece of it.
Yeah, exactly. We can't say, that we're media monitoring professionals and that we've got all this technology. Again, we don't really focus too much on that. But when it comes to the selling side of things, I think one of the competitive advantages that we have is that our service is free. So it's very easy to justify at least trying it out or using it to see if it's going to work for your needs.
So how do you make money then if it's free? Who's paying? Someone's paying.
That's a good question. I always like to tell folks, because I get this question all the time. We are more on the commercial side of things. We're looking at partnerships and integrations. I can't say necessarily one of the first, and I really think for us, we're more worried about being the best than the first. But on the commercial side of things, we have some other providers in our space who are interested in the technology that we've created and implemented, and kind of working more towards that and trying to leave the service free for customers as long as we can.
So if somebody uses this, do they get access to that journalist's email address and then they could reach out to them directly in the future, or do they have to go through it in the system? It's like you mentioned the Match.com analogy. Eventually people want to do things in IRL, right? They take it off the platform, they go in real life. How does that work here?
Yeah, we bridge those two very well. So most of the identifying, if you will, that kind of phase of things where you're figuring out who to pitch and where they're located and all of that, that's all available through the platform. But we have created functionality to where we can distribute emails, and eventually users can take those off to their own inbox. So I think we've done a pretty good job of being able to hone in on providing a lot of that information. Of course, all of this stuff is publicly available. It's not things that we're, guessing if this particular journalist has the same email that everyone within the news organization is going to have the same one.
Right.
If it's out there in the public space and it's accessible, we incorporate that into the platform. But at the end of the day, again, we've got some unique tools which allow folks to pitch and kind of track some of that outreach through the platform. But when it comes to the connection process, to getting the placement secured, to setting up an interview and all of that, that's all done outside of the platform through the normal inbox or via phone, or whatever the organic means would be for that.
What are you hearing recently from your journalist partners, the people that are in the system, your colleagues who are saying, here's what I want to see when I'm building a relationship? What is it that is changed, right? It's 2022. The game is different from 2012. There's so many more outlets that are not part of the commercial media sphere. There's so much on social media. Everyone's an influencer now. It's very scattered. It's very dispersed. But certain brand name outlets, everyone's still trying to get their story into. So what are you hearing is sort of the new best practices that would not have been the same 5 years ago?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think a lot of these answers we're seeing and hearing through our podcast at OnePitch called Coffee with a Journalist. And we've been fortunate enough, we sit down one-on-one and interview journalists every week, and we get them to basically share their pitching preferences with us. And I would say kind of the shift from where it was to now, a lot of journalists are not covering pitches. They're not necessarily even interested in being pitched news stories. And that's unless it's something that's highly relevant, highly, pertaining to their coverage area, or maybe even a news event that's occurring. Really, I feel like a lot of them are sharing with us, they just want to be introduced to sources. They want to be connected to people and with companies that they know relate very closely to their beat. And at any point, if they want to contact them to be a source, to work on a featured story, whatever the case may be, then that's really what they're most interested in. And I think one thing that's really, really interesting from the perspective of journalists that we hear a lot about is that, they'll get pitches and they typically will file them away into a folder, or they'll put, some information onto their own spreadsheet. It's kind of like their Rolodex. And at any point, again, like I mentioned, when they're ready to actually go out to those folks, they've kind of set up their own lists. It's almost like a PR list in reverse of a media list. So that's typically what we've been hearing, and what we've been seeing is they're not so interested in blanketed pitches and getting sent, all this information. Really, they just want to get connected with folks, make those introductions, and then move on them when the time is right.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I could see that in my job too. If you send me a random pitch that I wasn't expecting or I'm looking for, like, I don't know what to do with this. This is a chore you've given me. This is a lot of work. And I got to do a lot of research to figure out if I even want to do this. But you're right. If it's just, hey, you can get on the phone with our guy. He's happy to talk to you. No obligation. There's no expectation that you'll do something with this. Spend 20 minutes, talk to him. Maybe you'll get something useful out of it. Now you know who we are. I could see that being resonating better with me. It's like, okay, I can talk to the guy for 15, 20 minutes. It's the CEO of the company. It's the founder. It's whoever. It's a source. Maybe they'll tell me some background stories. Maybe they'll tell me something about their competitor. Maybe they'll give me some inside scoop. Maybe they'll give me an idea of a story that I should do. And that call maybe comes up with a story idea. And if they're giving me something interesting, okay, then I'll go back to them. They're going to be part of the story if they want to be. So I would agree with that. I never thought of that explicitly the way you put it, but I would agree that makes a lot of sense. Just give me something, not ask me to do something. That really changes my interest in wanting to get back to that email.
Exactly. Yeah, no. And it's funny that you mentioned just kind of how having that conversation can actually bring things up that you wouldn't expect. And more than likely that source wouldn't expect it to actually be something interesting. And we've, again, heard that through the podcast where people really appreciate having those conversations. And a lot of times it's like something at the end of the call, or just one little line that's said that actually sparks an idea and really has nothing to do, again, with a pitch or a message, that's been well thought out and crafted. It's really just something that kind of rolls off the tongue. And then all of a sudden a light bulb goes off, and that creates the idea for something in the future.
Yep. Yep. That totally makes sense. And I think about, you're right. I would do the same thing. I would get the emails and I would save them. Pitches, okay, go back later. And then I would know, okay, if I have a story, I need to reach this particular person who's doing this kind of cloud enterprise data. So now I got to go back to these guys, the PR people that I would deal with. Hey, do you have someone in that roster that I can talk to? Because now I've been assigned this story. Now I'm interested in the story, and it could be months later. So it is interesting to hear other people, they're doing the same thing. They're filing it away. I'll get to this when I need it. I'm building my own database based on what's coming in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I'm not sure if you're like a few of them who've gone back years, but most of the folks, again, that, they have those references in a folder or flagged some way. And I think one of the interesting things that we hear on the podcast, again, is that not only do they have these, these filtering systems, but they have ways of flagging and marking things so that they know this is like a higher priority, or this is something, okay, that might be more evergreen, for example. But either way, there's definitely a system there. We haven't really quite figured out if there's a rhyme or a reason to it yet, other than the fact that it's used, and that at the end of the day, the journalists are working well with the PR folks, which is really what we want.
What are some real mistakes that you see newbies doing? Whether it's either new agency or newer people at the agency, are there certain mistakes that you're like, please don't do this? This is a standard 101 textbook mistake you're not supposed to make.
There's a lot of them. I think one of the first things that comes to mind is being really promotional. Like, hey, we have this amazing product and you need to write about it. And, we'll send you a sample and we expect it to be done at this time, this date and this time, or something like that. We know very well that, journalists aren't just going to cover something because you ask them to. I would say secondary to that, and something that I've kind of heard more recently, is emailing reporters about a story. And if they don't respond, then emailing the editor saying that you've emailed the reporter and that they haven't responded. That's, I'm somewhat sure if that's maybe a newbie type of thing, but something new that I've heard, and it just kind of blows my mind.
That's very aggressive. That's very antagonistic. That's going to get you blocked, I think, because I would do that a lot. I would just block entire domain names. Like, all right, anything from this company, just delete it. I don't even want to see it in my inbox ever.
Yeah. And you're not the only one, I'm sure, who does that sort of thing, and I think it's very easy to piss somebody off, right? Or to get on their bad side versus getting on their good side. And so I always like to, again, using that Match.com example, I like to kind of tell folks that, maybe we work with through the company, or that I'm just on a call with, like, think of this almost like a date or like a relationship. Like, you want to lead with your best foot forward. You want to be transparent. You don't want to share too much right off the bat, but you want to think of this person as someone who you want to grow a relationship with. And you don't want to just talk to them once and never talk to them again, right? You want to facilitate and build and nurture and come to a point where you can kind of be best buds. And so there's, obviously a lot of different tactics that you can implement to do that. But at the end of the day, just kind of remembering they're human, and that just like you getting fed up with people who are annoying and pestering them, you got to kind of remember that and make sure that you're enacting you're putting your best foot forward, I should say, to make sure that you're not getting on the bad side of folks.
So how do you do it for yourself, for your own company? Because you're trying to get the story out for your company. You're trying to get journalists to write, but you are a meta example of what you're talking about. So what are you doing to get your own word out, to get your message, to get people to write, to talk about you? Because you should be the expert. So you shouldn't be making any mistakes. So how are you playing this game?
Yeah. It's kind of scary, Eric, to think that we are the experts, because at the end of the day, we even have our own troubles. Sometimes, we've made mistakes and we've caught ourselves and we've been called out on it. But I think for us, we know what journalists write about our types of companies, or at least, our space, very, very well. So we've created and facilitated very close relationships with those folks. And fortunately for us, it's a smaller pool of people. But I would say at the end of the day, if we were to go beyond just talking about software providers, there are plenty of other ways that, or other types of stories, that we could be pitching, but we feel like our strongest stories typically talk about our service a little bit more. and some of the unique things that we're doing. So for us, having a very, very strong pulse check on what stories have been written recently, how often they're being written. Again, if there's any sort of newsroom changes, keeping track of those, having, very soft check-ins, but periodically with the folks we're working with to hear about, what they're working on, if we can lend any sort of expertise and advice from our perspective. So I think really to kind of summarize that, we've really honed down a smaller list of individuals that we know are very hyper targeted towards what we do, and just having those consistent check-ins, and also being good about telling them ahead of time if we're going to be releasing something or if we have some news coming up, so that they can prepare accordingly. Because we know at the end of the day, there's a decision-making process where they have to pitch that to their editor and get approval. And then once that's all said and done, then the story can be written, but that could take a month or 2 months. So we're always trying to kind of prepare ahead of time and just make sure that we have our bases covered, and that we're, again, having those check-ins with folks to make sure that we haven't fallen off their radar and that we can lend any sort of assistance or insight when possible.
This sounds very familiar. Your entire story. Yep. I get that. I know what you're talking about. That sounds right up my alley. So talk about how many people, what's the size of this company? How have you grown it, bootstrapped it? Is there investors behind this? What's the structure here?
Mm-hmm. Our company is pretty small. There are a total of 6 employees currently. Myself, our marketing manager, we handle all of the marketing, sales, communications, customer support, content, podcast stuff, etc. The rest of our team are all developers, and we've got folks who are doing stuff on front end, back end. We've got some data science engineers that we work with. So we're a lean and mean team for certain. We would not be here without, really, really good organization and planning that we've been able to implement and get some solid systems and processes down. And we are pretty fortunate that we have been able to stay a bootstrap company since day one. And we've been advocates of wanting to stay that way. We know that there's plenty of venture money out there, but I think for us, it's really having the control of making our own decisions, of dictating the roadmap and kind of the future progress of the company. And, also holding ourselves accountable and really ensuring that if we're not hitting our goals, that we need to make the necessary changes in order to do that. So we've been pretty fortunate to sustain that again for the last couple of years. And our plan is to continue that for the next few and potentially have an acquisition or some sort of merger on the books in the next few years here.
You mentioned venture money. You're not taking it yourself, but you're certainly impacted by it because there's so much venture money in the marketplace right now. There are so many startups, so many tech companies, so many companies of all kinds. They want to get their story out there. So they're hiring agencies like crazy. PR's in a boom right now. They're hiring people like crazy. So even though you haven't taken venture money, you're still a beneficiary of that cycle. My guess is you look at this world right now and think, well, I hope this keeps going. I hope VC money keeps coming in, because if all of a sudden that stops, you could see a real big chain effect where it's fewer PR employees, fewer agencies, fewer startups, fewer tech companies, fewer everyone who needs this. And then maybe your sell's a little bit tougher.
Yeah, certainly. And I would, not cease to mention that we even work with some funds. We've got some of the comms managers who work for these funds using our service. And so we know the direct impact that has not only on the successes that we can help them with, but of course, getting folks on the service and being able to use it. So I don't see venture slowing down anytime soon here. I think, for what we've seen, at least thus far in 2022, it seems like it's still running pretty full force, and that it's not going to be slowing down anytime soon here.
Talk about the personality it takes to be an entrepreneur, to be a company founder or a co-founder, because I have these conversations at home so many times, just having met people more recently in the last couple of years, who's a career employee, who's someone who's a risk taker, who's someone that can deal with the chaos of starting their own company. And some people are good at it. Some people are terrible at it. Some people try it. They do it again. It's like, oh, I'm going to do another company. Some people say, I tried it. I'm never going to do that again. Are you, as you're going through your own journey and you're working with different people who are founders and employees and everything in this ecosystem, are you noticing there are certain traits that are always represented in the founders and the entrepreneurs that seem to have success?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one particular trait that kind of tends to separate entrepreneurs from the rest is kind of having that visionary mindset of seeing, the 10,000 foot view. Some of them are not as fortunate enough to be able to stay there. Some of them have to get into the weeds, myself included, and really, drive in on the day to day to make sure that things are going on and operating effectively. But I think from a perspective of an entrepreneur, certainly dealing with risk or being comfortable with risk, dealing with chaos, having a lot of uncertainty. There's obviously a lot of mental health issues that affect entrepreneurs. So I think making sure you have a very strong support system is super important. Making sure that you have the resources that you can take care of yourself, because it can be very stressful and it can seem like things are not working well. And, that's pretty scary at the end of the day. But I think, for certain, there's probably a bunch of other traits that I'm not going over right now that I'm kind of blanking on. But I think, at the end of the day, it's being able to just be agile, to adapt, and to really just know that, or believe, I guess I should say, in what you're doing.
Yeah, I think the agile and adapt is a good one, because I think about growing companies. You can't instill a process that's going to change as you get a little bit bigger, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this worked when we had 5 people. It doesn't work at 500 people. So
Yep.
I think being agile and adapting is certainly key. What about the effect of COVID last couple of years? Newsrooms have been in total, all work from home mode, right? There's a completely different way that work is getting done right now. Have you had to change your approach either as your company or for your clients, the agencies? Have they had to change their approach? Because we're at Feb, March, Q1 2022. You're 2 years now into this, and there are some people that have literally not been in that office for 2 years. They may never come back, and it changes the dynamic, right? It changes your ability. Maybe we can't meet someone in person. Maybe we can't get that editor approval right away. Maybe there's not a typical stand-up meeting every day at 9 a.m. I'm sure things have changed, but I'd like to hear your perspective on it.
Yeah, for us as a company, the pandemic was eye-opening for us, because it really allowed us to take a step back and reassess what we were doing and how we worked with our customers. And in November of 2020 is actually when we released our second version of OnePitch, which is the service that I explained earlier today. So for us, it was a way to kind of take a step back and reassess and use it really as an opportunity to revisit what we were doing and how we approach things and how we work with our clients. Unfortunately for most of the clients that we worked with, there were layoffs. There were people who were not there anymore that we were traditionally used to working with. We did see a lot of people switch companies as well. But I think from the perspective of our service, we're fortunate enough that we've always been a software as a service. It's always been a web application. So being able to access it has always been easy. We've put a lot of time and attention into our mobile version of our website as well. So being able to access across devices has allowed a lot of folks to hone in on, hey, maybe I'm not at my computer at my desk, but I can still hop on my phone and access my lists or send out some pitches if I need to. And I think from the journalist perspective, that has been somewhat of a challenge for us in terms of the many newsroom changes and newsroom switches. As I mentioned, we are operating, managing, building our own database. And so keeping up with those trends has been somewhat difficult, especially as a small team. But I think at the end of the day, it kind of goes back to that mindset of being agile and adapting. And we've been able to keep up with the pace of things and to make sure that we're giving all the customers the proper attention, as well as making sure that, our database is curated and managed and up to date. And so again, I think for us, we've been super, super fortunate. The pandemic did not hit us as hard as it could have. And obviously very grateful that we're still able to work with, all the people that we have been up to this point, for sure.
Appreciate the story, Jered. Really fascinating to see what you guys are doing here, the technology, what it can do. I wish that it existed a little earlier, so it could have maybe made my life a little bit better. So I appreciate the time today, Jered, and I look forward to seeing what this will be over the next 12, 24, 36 months. Excited for you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eric. Really appreciate you allowing me to join today and to get to share the story a little bit. It's a lot of fun.
Thanks, Jered. Appreciate it. Thank you to my guest, and thanks for listening. Subscribe to get the latest episodes each week, and we'll see you next time.